My dears, my queers, my basketeers, welcome to the River Broadcast. Do pull up a throne and pop the kettle on. Shall we begin with something nice? That is a birthday that was not guaranteed for the Princess Royal, but indeed today she turns 74 years old, entering her final year of her autumn season. Indeed, she was born on the 15th of August in 1950 at Clarence House, and she was known as Princess Anne until the late Queen gave her the title Princess Royal, and she is the 7th Princess Royal, which is a title held for life, and customarily it's bestowed upon the eldest daughter of a sovereign, and she received a multitude of well wishes from hundreds of patronages and people that she has supported over the years: the Royal Navy, the Edinburgh Tattoo, the Royal Collection, Scottish Rugby, etc., etc., etc. The list is endless. And for a while there she was looking bruised and battered and beaten up, but she was back to business and healed very quickly, and we're pleased to see it. And over at Balmoral, at that castle of fairy tales, things have now closed to commoners and peasants and paupers, and the royal family have now retreated to the estate for summer. Of course, they've been in the surrounds for some time, but now the King and Queen are going to begin receiving beloved family members and friends over the coming weeks, and we wish them a very special time. But while true working royalty closes the doors and retreats to their fairy tale castle, the drawbridge opens at the Casa Montesquieu overseas, doesn't it? The drawbridge opens because true royalty, true American royalty, the King and Queen of Sussex, have business to attend to. They have the worldwide privacy tour to be getting on with. They've done the Nigerian leg, now they have the Colombian leg. And by the way, Princess Anne just turned 74, but in 1 month from today, Prince Harry turns 40 years old. And do I think that is a sign that he might start showing some sort of maturity and behaving like a grown adult? No, I do not. I do not think that is likely. One iota, I'm afraid. He will be foolish and stupid way into his second childhood. He's dyed in the wool that way. So they've now arrived in Colombia at the invitation of the Vice President. And if you're wondering exactly why they are there, what purpose it could possibly serve, they are there to promote Colombia to tourists. They are, in effect, travel agents. They want everybody to think that they can be passed off as real royalty, the true King and Queen, King Henry IX. No, that is actually not what they are there for. They are travel agents, salespeople. Nobody in Colombia knows who they are. And I've had comments from several Colombians to let me know the coup. And save for a tiny niche handful of Colombians, no one knows. To be honest, they don't really care about the British royal family to any great effect, other than a little niche, and it's a niche of that niche that have heard about the Harkles, and they're the very few extremely woke snowflakes and fruitcakes. Although I will say that Colombia are the only South American country, or at least they were the first, to have an Invictus team, so they do have that connection with the country. But what happened in Nigeria was that a lot of publicity was generated. Yes, some good, some bad, but it was money can't buy publicity. It got Nigeria out into the world's press and on the headlines. And Colombia were obviously looking on there. But also, this is what you have to understand. Francia Marquez, the Vice President that invited them, encountered Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, only late last year. Do you remember that? We covered it here on the broadcast. She had a brush with royalty. It was highly successful. And meanwhile, the Duke and Duchess of Sussex have one or two things in common with the late Duke and Duchess of Windsor, Edward and Bessie Wallace. No, not the elegance, not the style, not the conviviality. No, they don't have that in common. But Meghan does rather look like Bessie Wallace, and Harry does like to parade his wife around as if she is queen. And that is something that Edward liked to do with Bessie Wallace, because he didn't feel that the British family in Britain had shown her the respect that she deserved. So he trotted her all around the rest of the world and went to the opening of an envelope, every invitation, every soiree. Oh yes, of course, of course. And this is what Harry does, you see, marauding around as if he is Viceroy. Remember, he hankers for that role as Viceroy, and she is a Viceress. And don't forget, she's got connections with that part of the world. The marauder's mistress has connections. Remember, she was the Ava of her time. Evita Descamisados. She was the Eva Peron of her time. She was an ambassador for Argentina and waved on the cavalcade to the Descamisados below. Remember that. So they fancy themselves as Windsors, and every time he's invited somewhere or forges an invitation, it strokes his ego, and it gives him the veneer of those who are deferring to him, the veneer of seniority and credibility and diplomacy. But what you've got to understand, my dears, is that during the Duchess of Edinburgh's visit in December of 2023, the Harkles were looking on through squinted eyes from a distance. They were looking on at the press, as usual, scouring the columns for anything that distressed them, anything libelous. And Sophie Edinburgh was there for a 4-day visit at the request of the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And she was in Bogota, where Harry and Meghan are headed, and she was in Cali, amongst other places, for engagements that were, get this, in support of the women, peace and security agenda. And she was there to champion the survivors of conflict-related sexual violence on serious matters and on the rights of women and girls. That's what Sophie was there for. And as you might recall, the Duchess of Sussex declined the offer of mentorship, friendly mentorship and advice from Sophie when she offered it many years ago. Declined it. Oh, thanks, but no thanks. That won't be necessary. And this was at a time when Sophie was functioning in her role as the Countess of Wessex. Oh, Sophie, darling. Sophie, I am the new Duchess of Sussex. And I hate all this hierarchy business. Sophia, Soph, whatever your name is. But you are a mere countess. You are a countess. I am a duchess. I outrank you. I'm so sorry. And my children are going to be higher up in the line of succession than yours. And so as much as I appreciate your kind offer of mentorship, no, I don't want it. In fact, I might be able to teach you one or two things about what a true queen is and what a true proud, confident woman of colour can be. A Countess Wessex. Yeah, you can imagine the conversation. And then, of course, at the late Queen's funeral, we were furnished with the imagery. We were furnished. We... Oh, it really is a disgrace, isn't it? We were furnished. It's not funny. With the imagery of Meghan and Sophie being driven in the same car. She had the honour of being driven with Sophie in the procession. And what Meghan has discovered in all of these exchanges, and whenever she is round Sophie, is that she simply does not compare favourably with Sophie. Not at all. Why, I hear you ask? Well, it's because Sophie radiates goodness. She radiates goodness. And you don't need me to convince you of that. It is absolutely tangible. And in fact, anybody who is good gets short shrift from Meghan, Catherine, Elizabeth, Sophie, whosoever it be, all of good character. Meghan senses it. She doesn't understand that it's because they're good and she's rotten, but they're all of good character and their presence makes Meghan's teeth itch. And so what went on with Sophie at the end of last year in Colombia did not go down with Meghan, because Meghan has to be the first. This clashes with Meghan's own vision of herself, her story, starting, beginning at the Immaculate Fight, with all her good doings for the causes of feminism. She flipped the course of feminism on its head. She did more than the suffragettes for women. It was Meghan and her washing up objections. She was the first black woman in the British royal family, or any royal family in the world, according to her. It's her story. She has to be the first, and she has to be she was the only proud female to speak up for women. It's on her shoulders. She is the feminist. She is the radical revolutionary. SJW. So Colombia, when she spotted that and spotted up and began getting all vexed over Sophie being there and raining on her parade, well, it was perfect, wasn't it? It was the perfect opportunity for them to muscle in. There's something pathological about it. When it comes to both of those parts of that folie à deux, there is something pathological about the pair of them. Deeply unsettling. And somebody who might have experienced some of that is Josh Kettler, who has completed his 3-month trial period, working for them. Yes. And guess what? He's out of there 3 months in. Now we are told that this is a mutual decision. It was agreed, apparently, that John Kettler was not the right fit for Harry and Meghan. He began his tenureship in earnest before the Nigerian leg of the worldwide privacy tour, and he accompanied Harry to London, you might remember, for Invictus and their 10th anniversary. But this is very bad timing, because Colombia is now imminent. And he, by the way, was their chief of staff. Lasted 3 months. Really. In, out, shake it all about. And he joins an avalanche of Sussex snowballs and snowflakes, doesn't he? Who melted under the heat of Montecito. And so it seems that their get-up is entirely the opposite of the Willy Wonka chocolate factory. Remember that? Willy Wonka's? Nobody ever goes in, and nobody ever comes out. Well, that was Willy Wonka. But in Montecito, it's the complete opposite. They come and they go. And they don't call Meghan the everlasting gobstopper for nothing. The Duchess of Edinburgh has actually been on more beautiful business, arriving at Ocean Youth Trust South's vessel, the Prolific, as patron of the Association of Sailing Training Organisations. This was a sojourn to the Channel Island to observe the Guernsey to Poole race for small ships, and Prolific was established in 2005 and pays tribute to the fishing vessels of the Norwegian coast during the 19th century. And Her Royal Highness wore a very casual blue polo shirt with Ray-Bans and espadrilles and a designer beach bag. And she took to the water, meeting 100 young people ahead of the small ship race, which commemorates the Royal National Lifeboat Institution's 200th anniversary. A comment from a basketeer by the name of Karen Shields. Dear River, not sure what it is like for renting a place in the UK, but here in Canada, nationwide, prices to rent are astounding. My thinking is, if there is a lack of places to live, jobs to have, doctors to visit, then it's time to stop immigration. I can see an uprising of pissed off white people in the future. Well, not just white people here, mind dear. A variety of colours here in the kingdom. But I understand what you're saying. Many of these places, I suppose, do involve white working classes. The scripture says, in the last days, the world will be in worse shape than Sodom and Gomorrah. It's all a sign of the times, in my opinion. Well, Karen, my dear, you mention in your comment a lack of jobs available here in the kingdom, and I'm sure perhaps in Canada. And it put me in mind of an article that was doing the rounds last week via The Spectator. It was a Douglas Murray piece, and it was a very popular piece. In fact, I saw the editor of The Spectator saying that that article had garnered more new subscribers than any other article all year. And Mr. Murray is taking a lot of heat, as you may know, at the moment on social media and beyond. Of course, he was ahead of the curve in many ways, and his books evidently warned the West of what was round the corner for many years, although I'll caveat that by saying that I haven't read his books. I know you've recommended them to me many times, and I know the thrust of what they're about, but I can't claim to have read them. I've got too many on my to-read list to ever get through, as it is, my dear. But you all know Douglas Murray, and the piece was The Unfashionable Truth About the Riots, and he compared statistics in that piece concerning some of the cities where the rioting occurred and where there's been civil unrest. He compared statistics from 2011 to today, places like Sunderland, Rotherham, Hartlepool, these sort of places. Unemployment rising. In fact, a quarter of people of working age in Hartlepool, for example, are now claiming welfare for incapacity or worklessness, a quarter. And Mr. Murray makes the point that governments have been unable to improve education. This is successive governments, not just one, unable to improve education, incentives, job opportunities, and instead they went for what he calls an easy route, which was issuing visas for migrants and claiming then that the economy was growing as a result. But studies seem to show that governments taking this approach has actually benefited the migrant, but not the economy. It's been undercutting local labour and increasing demand for housing and limited housing stock. In 2011, foreign-born workers accounted for 14% of the UK workforce. Today, that percentage, 21%. From 14% to 21% since 2011, foreign-born workers. And the communities who needed more work have been bypassed. And you ask about rent, my dear. Rent differs wildly depending on location here in the kingdom. Differs wildly, but London is what I know about, and London is eye-watering for rent. The average salary here in the kingdom is about £35,000 a year, which is about 45,000 US dollars. But in London, that increases to £44,000 a year. That's the average salary for London workers, which is about $56,000 a year. Well, we won't even go into the house prices in London, and that's a horse of a completely different colour anyway. I know that many of you abroad who aren't au fait with our prices here would be shocked to see how much property you can get, how little square footage you get for the price here in London. You know, it's rather obscene. The good thing, if there is a positive side to that, is the fact that once you are on the housing ladder, then your property is likely to increase and appreciate at a rate that is very beneficial to one. But if you are not in a position to get on that housing ladder in the first place, then it's entirely frustrating, and you're of course forced to rent. And most people have to spend most of their income on their rent. There's no way around it. Otherwise you have to commute in and out of the city, and that's another wheeze. That's another several £1,000s a year on commuting in and out. Well, as I've mentioned to you before, I lived in many house shares throughout the years. And in fact, most people I know house shared as they were studying, and then in years beyond. I think that I probably shared houses in at least 10 different abodes through the years, some that I remained in for some time, others that I sort of skipped about in. And it became progressively more difficult to find reasonable and fair deals as time went on. Although actually, I've got to say, landlords get a bad rap for being greedy, and I've certainly come across greedy landlords, but I have come across generous landlords in the past who did not charge market value for their abodes. So both types exist. And many landlords now, by the way, are being put off from the rental market because of the uncertainty in the market and also the regulations and all the health and safety bureaucracy and red tape that's put in place. And actually what would scare me off becoming a landlord are all the extra rights for tenants. Landlords are finding themselves in the position where their tenants can basically squat for years on end or forever and can't get turfed out. So many landlords are actually just selling up at the moment while they can and getting out of that game. London is split into various zones. They're actually travel zones that are used to charge various fees on the London Underground, for example, and on the overground lines. And I'll flash up a map. But the red part that you can see in the middle is Zone 1, and then the next blue ring around it is Zone 2, and it goes on and so forth, 5 or 6 zones, whatever it is, my dear. The red zone in the middle, the Zone 1, that's where most of the tourist places that you all know and love are in central London that you might know about. And then Zone 2 is where I have always lived. I don't think, perhaps once I lived in Zone 1 and once I lived on the border of 2 and 3. There might be more examples, but I can't remember, dear. I lived in so many places. But mainly I've lived in Zone 2, around that Zone 2 ring. And I wouldn't want to ever go any further out than that. But generally speaking, the further you go out, the cheaper the accommodation becomes. There are exceptions to that. For example, as you go further out, you'll find places like Richmond or Twickenham. And there are plenty of other places where the prices are steep, but generally speaking, the closer you are to the centre, the more expensive the accommodation is going to be. But in Zone 2 and the sort of areas that I know in Zone 2, for example, if you just wanted a studio flat, what they call a studio flat, which is usually nothing really more than a glorified bedsit. I remember one that I lived in that was basically no more than a kitchen with a bed plonked in the middle of it and some sort of IKEA dining table. And that was a studio flat, I ask you, which is just about affordable. But I remember 6 months into it being issued with notice that the rent was actually going to go up to the tune, to bring it in line with market value. So they told me up a further £250 a month that one has to suddenly find out of thin air. So you're subject to huge hikes all the time coming up. But for a studio flat, even I'm talking basic, nothing especially pleasant or pleasing, not the best locations, but you're talking well over £1,000 a month for that. There are exceptions to the rule, but really, approaching £1,500 or much, much more. It varies wildly. But if you want a one bedroom, if you actually want a separate bedroom from the rest of your living quarters, and you probably won't get a separate kitchen or lounge, everything else will be amalgamated into one room, then you're talking, 2,000 plus, and it can go way into, 3, 4, 5,000, depending on the precise road that you find yourself in, but you can find deals, for sort of £2,000 a month. And the depressing thing about all of this, of course, is, well, aside from the fact that all the London properties that you see now, many of them are losing their charm and their sort of cute appeal, for want of a better word, because they've been chopped up and spliced up and sort of cynically altered to squeeze the most money out of them. As I say, many rooms are amalgamated into one. So you find kitchen, diners amalgamated with the sitting room and sometimes an office as well, and it becomes a studio. I've seen flats that were already originally fairly small, over one floor, divided up into 2 flats, sometimes even 3. And that's depressing enough as it is, because it gives off a sort of stingy atmosphere to the environment, sort of a meanness to the environment of these London homes that were once grand. But moreover, it means that a locale can lack the diversity that was once there. And I'm talking about creative diversity. the creativity, because only elites or only international students with deep pockets, or those who bank with the bank of mum and dad, or granny and grandpa, only those can afford to come together and congregate and work and rub shoulders with each other and mingle. And that's a real shame, because every fruit basket deserves a decent selection of ripe fruits and rich delights, of variety, you understand, variety of backgrounds. Thank you for joining me, my dears. I appreciate your company, and I look forward to catching up with you in the next broadcast. Channel the royal spirit and to the pip.